Okay, let's get started with our very first shot. We'll make this a simple 30-second exposure, and let's talk about what you'll need to know for this shot. First, you're going to need to know how to put your camera into manual exposure mode. Secondly, you're going to need to know how to turn your autofocus off in case our automatic focus won't work. And we're going to be using in this shot our variable neutral density filter with one stacked filter. That'll give us from 8 to 13 stops of neutral density. We're going to be using a shutter release so we don't vibrate the camera, and of course a tripod. So let's get started. The most important thing in a long exposure is you reduce vibration. So we have a good tripod. We get it set very firmly, especially in sand. You want to be careful. You don't want it to be sinking over 30 seconds. Next, turn off your image stabilization. What happens is in a long exposure, it sees movement and tries to compensate for it, creating a blurry image. And I've done that so many times. Turn off your image stabilization. Now let's compose our shot. Because it's so dark with neutral density filters, we're going to open up our variable filter so it's the lightest it can be, making it easier to compose. I'm going for a little bit of a wide shot. I've got these cliffs in the background going off at an angle, and I've got these waves breaking on the rocks in the foreground. It'll make a really interesting shot. Now I've got some kayakers out there, but they're not going to even show up probably because they're moving. That's the great thing about a 30-second exposure. Let's take our first exposure and see where we're at. Now we're in manual mode, so I'm going to match my needles and turn the variable density filter to reduce the amount of light until I have a correct exposure. Now let's take it and see what it looks like. 5, 4. It looks good, but it's a little bright, so I'm going to darken that just a little bit. I'm going to go down to about 2/3 of an f-stop underexposed. Now the waves are a little bit calm right now, and the timing of the waves will have a great effect on how your water looks. So let's wait for another set to come in. Okay, here's one now. Obviously, we don't want any movement during the exposure. And if there's high winds and you have a long lens, that can be really problematic. So I'll often get my jacket and create a wind block between me and the camera. Much, much better. So what we've got here is some great foreground motion, and then the glassy water from the long exposure, and then the fixed cliffs just dwindling out into the horizon. So this is a good first shot using a basic 30-second exposure and a variable neutral density filter.